Well, what a fantastic day in Broncos country because the Ring of Fame has honored two of the best in Broncos history, Steve Foley, Riley Odoms. We are here to talk about it. It's Orange and Blue today. Cecil, Lammey, Andrew Mason, and Mace. Can we say finally
Yeah.
for these two men to be in
Mm.
the Ring of Fame? Long overdue.
Long overdue. Riley Odoms, multiple time All Pro back in the 70s until Von Miller, the last top five draft pick for the Broncos. And certainly did not disappoint over his 12 years. And Steve Foley didn't have the All Pro recognition, but over the course of his career that began in 1976 and lasted until Super Bowl 25. This was the thing about him. He breached eras of Broncos history. Steve Foley had more interceptions than anybody in the history of the team. And so it was always odd to me that Odoms was not in it. That, you could say second best tight end in the history of the team behind Shannon Sharp, who's literally in the conversation for the greatest tight end of all time, and Steve Foley holding a major record in interceptions that is unlikely to be broken in our lifetime, I would say. So these were two significant omissions from the Ring of Fame, and it's good to see them finally get the honor they deserve.
Well, I don't know how much inside baseball you want to get on this show, Mace, but just kind of behind the scenes, like there had been some delays with Ring of Fame
Mm-hmm.
selections. Of course, we know during the era of the trust, things were just kind of up in the air or whatever. But you see with the Walton Penner group, and Steve Foley, commented about Greg Penner and Kerry Walton Penner multiple times at the press conference yesterday. You just see how this ownership is going to get those things right.
I think there is a significance to the first Ring of Fame inductees in the Walton Penner era being players from the 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
There is a very healthy respect for history of the team and how the history of the team intertwines with the growth and history of Denver itself and Colorado itself. I mean, look, Greg Penner and Kerry Walton Penner were spending a lot of time in Colorado long before they bought the team. Right. This is a place they love, and loving Colorado means, at least over the last 60 years or so, knowing that the Denver Broncos and the growth of the team and how people latched onto it is a significant part of the growth of Colorado. And the 1977 team in particular is one unlike any other, I would argue, in NFL history, let alone in Denver history, as far as what it meant to this city. So their first Ring of Famers being two guys who were on that team, I think, is especially apt. And then as part of the whole thing, bringing back the 1977 uniforms, except moving the TV numbers from the sleeve to the shoulders to accommodate modern uniform cuts. That's part of it as well. It looks like they're going to go in for the Raiders game, week 5. Seems like that may be the throwback game as well, when you see those beautiful throwback uniforms. And so it's gonna be a really exciting weekend, really fun weekend around here.
Oh, those throwback uniforms. They're so
Oh,
damn good.
I have nothing against the new uniforms. I think the new uniforms are a significant upgrade.
They're fine.
And they're fine. And actually, the thing is, like, most of the NFL now, as teams have changed uniforms in the last few years, most of the NFL is fine. Like, Tampa Bay got rid of the alarm clock numbers. Cleveland Browns got rid of Browns up the side of the pants. The Vikings streamlined their look. The Jets have a nice, sleek look. You look around most of the NFL. Most of the NFL looks pretty good, including the Broncos. But yeah, seeing the lighter blue,
Legacy blue,
the orange legacy blue. Thank you. The D on the helmet. Yeah, I think people are going to get chills when they see that uniform and a team of players in that uniform running onto the field. I think it's gonna.
Yeah.
It's gonna hit everyone in the feels, I think.
Well, as an older gentleman, Mace, as I was watching
By the
Steve
way,
Foley yesterday.
my cup today. What do you think?
Oh yes, so people are going to notice that because they notice your Bills cup. They're going to notice your old school D cup.
Yeah.
But as I'm watching and just listening to the wisdom that we got from Steve Foley yesterday, I was thinking that defense was part of the reason why I fell in love with football. But Walter Payton is my number one player of all time as I'm wearing my Sweetness sweatshirt.
Yeah.
My number two player of all time is Tommy Jackson.
Ooh.
Steve Foley was on one of three players. You'll know the other two because I think the other one's Tom, and I don't know who the third one is. One of three players that started in both 77 and 86 in the Super Bowls. But
I think it was Reuben.
Tommy?
I think it was Tom Jackson, Steve Foley, and was it Reuben Carter?
Might have been. And then Foley was position switch, right? Because he was a cornerback in 77.
Early in his career, and he went to safety. That's right.
Yeah, but for the Walton Penner group, Mace, it's a respect for the past, but it's also an adoration, for the Broncos just themselves. Not a like, we own the Broncos, it's our time and it's our moment, and here's our uniforms and here's our future. No, it's also like, we love you and we love this history. It's respect and adoration, and Steve Foley certainly represents that.
Yeah, they got this one. They got this one right. You got me down a rabbit hole for the moment. Okay, it was not Reuben Carter. My bad. Okay, Louis Wright. Duh, right there.
Louis Wright. Okay.
Tom Jackson, Louis Wright, and Steve Foley.
There you go.
All started. It was Louis Wright's last game too. Wow. So actually, Steve Foley, Louis Wright, Tom Jackson, their last game was Super Bowl 21.
Wow.
Yeah. And collectively, those guys, they're important in Broncos history because they bridged eras. I mean, you look at Steve Foley when he walks in 1976. The team's never been in the postseason. Tom Jackson, who really bridged the eras, he walked in 1973. The team had never had a winning season before he got there, and he walked out having played in his second Super Bowl with John Elway and with Pat Bowlen running the team. And so when I had the chance to on Thursday, I did ask Steve Foley about this because those guys, he's part of a pretty unique group of players in Broncos history that were not only a part of the Orange Crush era, but really a part of what became kind of the modern John Elway era. And of course, having Pat Bowlen run the team. And, Steve Foley will tell you, as he told you, Pat Bowlen really changed things, but there's a lot to unpack from what Steve said.
For the Broncos, it was a lot of change. My first year was John Ralston, and he drafted most of that or all of that Super Bowl team. But he got fired, and then Red Miller came in and took that team to the Super Bowl my second year. And then Red coached for 2 or 3 years, and then Dan Reeves came in. And the ownership changed. It went from Phipps to Kaiser and then to Pat Bowlen. And the greatest thing about Pat Bowlen was he was going to do what it took to win. And he was going to do what he needed to get the players. It was win. He wants to win. And that was the biggest culture change. In the NFL, the teams were, it was like, I want to say that they sold the team for into 30 millions to Kaiser, and then Kaiser sold it for into 80 millions and to Bowlen, and then now you're talking billions, $4.5 billion, and so that's changed quite a bit, and but the culture was when it was always there, and it just got ramped up, and so. We're thankful that we have the Penners. I think they're a great ownership group. They got the resources. They want to be the best. They want to be the best at whatever they can do to make this the premier franchise and lift it even to greater heights.
Significant.
It's all about wanting to win, right? Wanting to, and not just wanting to win the lip service. I think it was Tom Jackson, not just wanting to win, because you can have lip service, but you got to actually do the things to win. And part of it is knowing your players. There's a story that I think Tom Jackson has told a few times about how, Gerald Phipps, who don't get me wrong, really important in Broncos history as the owner from the mid-'60s through selling the team to Edgar Kaiser in 1981. Like Gerald Phipps would walk around the locker room and, would go up to guys and say good game and all that, but wasn't sure that they knew that he knew everybody personally, right? Just kind of a little more distant of an owner when it came to the football and the ins and outs. And then you have Edgar Kaiser for a few years, and he did something important, traded for John Elway. Was smart enough to negotiate with Robert Irsay and not with Ernie Accorsi, the GM.
Much to the chagrin of Ernie Accorsi.
Yeah, Kaiser goes to Dan Reeves and says, you know what? I got this. We're good. But Pat Bowlen, man, I mean, he did change things, but he knew, like, he was involved with the players. And the players also understood that, like, this guy's putting every dime he has, and became leveraged for a while to win. Like everything was about putting the product on the field and doing the best to win. And really, you look back on it, and not that the Orange Crush wasn't important, but Pat Bowlen coming in there was the birth of the modern Denver Broncos. And that continues to this day. I think you've got ownership that goes about it in a little bit different way, but is still committed to kind of being around and being known. I mean, how often do you see Greg Penner out there at practice, right? It's just like Pat Bowlen used to do.
Yep.
Wants to be involved. I mean, now let people do their jobs, but he wants to know what's going on, not absentee, committed to providing the resources to win. So, and then it's up to the players and coaches to do it, because that's another thing entirely. And say this for Steve Foley and the Orange Crush and Riley Odoms and all those guys, they figured out how to win when maybe resources weren't at their strongest, and they did it anyway. And so it really went off like a rocket ship once Pat Bowlen walked in.
The 77 team, so very important to Colorado sports and to Broncos history. And I will tell a story from Tom Jackson as well, Mace, because they had an opportunity, and Steve Foley spoke on this, but they went through the Pittsburgh Steelers when they won 4 in 6 years.
Yeah.
They were a dynasty of the 70s. They won 4 Super Bowls in 6 years. In the gap where they didn't win Super Bowls, the Denver Broncos beat them. Terry Bradshaw went up to Tom Jackson after that playoff game and said, things will never be the same here now.
Yeah.
I got chills just saying that.
Telling
that story, because it's so truthful from Bradshaw to Tommy Jackson of, like, Denver's different now.
Yep.
And then they beat the Raiders to go to the Super Bowl 12. Things were different.
There's never anything like the first time. B, all of a sudden, all of the things that were considered successful and all of the standards went out the window. I mean, not that Broncos fans couldn't be rough on their team. Riley Odoms, who's also going into the Ring of Fame. We're going to talk a little bit about him as well. Riley Odoms said something to the effect of, when he was a rookie, they came back home from a preseason game, and there were people holding up signs that said Denver Donkeys.
Okay.
But there was, a year later, a great deal of ecstasy around Denver about the Broncos getting their first winning season after 13 years to start the franchise of not breaking 500. But once you win that playoff game and you're headed for the Super Bowl, everything changed. And those standards persist today, because even though you and I realistically look at this coming season, and perhaps we don't define it by going to the playoffs, winning the Super Bowl, that kind of thing, I think a lot of people still do. So if the Broncos go 6-11 and Bo Nix plays really well, I think pundits are going to feel good about it. But I'm sure there's a healthy percentage of Broncos country that won't feel good, because they'll say, hey, you missed the playoffs. Another losing season. And we don't like losing seasons around here. So I get And that all started on Christmas Eve in 1977.
That's right. It's great hearing Steve Foley talk, hearing that New Orleans accent coming through.
Oh yeah. He
And
never
then-
lost it.
He never
'Cause
did.
He's lived here ever since he became a Bronco. And you can still hear the Louisiana in his accent. And because of that connection, he admits he was rooting for the Saints and Sean Payton, not over the Broncos, but he was watching him closely. And so, he's a dude who's pretty excited about what's going on with the Broncos right now.
Pretty excited about what he's seen, and pretty excited about Sean Payton. And it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Like he understands what it takes.
Yeah.
He was part of it, of what it took to make it to a Super Bowl twice with
Yes.
this team,
Twice with basically completely different teams.
right?
That's the thing. Like the 77 was defense, 86 was the drive. And that's why like he's one of those guys you can't write the Broncos history without. The other thing also, he had a knack of having some big plays in big games. I mean, the Broncos won the division in 1984, 13-3. That came down to a winner-take-all game, Week 16 in Seattle. Winner goes to the division. Winner wins the division. Losers in the wild card round. Steve Foley, who, as he said that game, was given the unenviable assignment of playing slot corner basically for a while, jumped a pass and took it all the way in the other direction for a pick six that has effectively salted the game away. But he could play free safety because he started his career, or he played slot corner, because he started his career at free at slot corner before moving to free safety. All the position shifts get tangled and all that. And it was actually cool to hear him talk kind of the detail about that. He also talked about his first game at corner when, of course, he got thrown in the starting lineup, and he pointed out that that was a game that they were playing the San Diego Chargers, and he got
go against Dan Fouts.
Now, I have to say this: Dan Fouts wasn't Dan Fouts in 1976. Don Coryell, Eric Coryell, and all the dynamic nature of that offense, that was still 2 years away from walking into San Diego. Dan Fouts that year, 14 touchdowns, 15 picks, 75.4 rating. Not bad, but not yet there. But still, pretty good quarterback who did test Steve Foley, and Foley had 2 picks that day. By the way, he had 2 picks the following game as well, because he started the next game for the Broncos against the New York Giants. Can you tell me then what quarterback he picked off twice in his second career start?
Oh boy, I would not have a guess right now.
Craig Morton.
Ah, very good.
Another Ring of Famer. Craig Morton traded to the Broncos in the following offseason, was still in the midst of a very unhappy stint with the New York Giants. Unhappy for him, unhappy with the fans. Fans were unhappy with him. But yeah, so 4 picks in 2 games. And at that point, with Steve Foley, he was on his way. He was on his way to where now he's going to look up on the facade and see his name in the Broncos Ring of Fame. Should have happened a long time ago. I would argue this. When Simon Fletcher got in, and Simon Fletcher, very similar resume to Steve Foley, lacks things like all pros, Pro Bowls, but had a significant record for a long time. That was the sack record. Simon Fletcher getting in, to me, said, okay, it's time to get Steve Foley in. Fletch went in back in 2016. So Foley's had to wait another 8 years. That's when I would have, if it were up to me, I would have accelerated that a little bit. But that's just me.
Yeah, of course they had that everything going on where there was a delay. Now it seems to
they were putting people in the Ring of Fame even like during the trust years. In fact, the Jason Elam, John Lynch, Simon Fletcher year was in the 3rd season with the trust. Red Miller went in with the trust. So they were still putting people in the Ring of Fame. The Ring of Fame committee was still meeting and adding. The interesting pause happened the the last couple of years, especially last year, the Walton Penner Group electing in their first full year not to put anybody in the Ring of Fame. You make up for it with 2 this year. I got to ask you this, Cecil. Were you surprised that it was 2? Because I figured it would be 1, but not 2, and that they would punt 1 to a future year.
I can't say I was surprised it was 2. I guess I wasn't anticipating really anything. I was just kind of waiting because there's others. We're going to talk
there
about
are
that on
others.
another show.
But the guys from the 70s, I think there's the most obvious, let's get them in. And this year with the 77 uniforms coming back, and very specifically, if you look at the stripe pattern on the socks, that's the 1977 pattern. That's what this uniform is designed to mimic. And all sorts of stuff planned for that game. I think it was appropriate to make sure that you got at least one player from that time in. I had a good feeling about Riley Odoms. I thought Steve Foley might wait a year, but hey, just get it done. Just get him in, stop the wait. And, Riley Odoms, a different case for the Ring of Fame, but equally strong, one of the best tight ends in the NFL in the 1970s, and a dude that was ahead of his time, you could say, a forerunner of the big, scary pass-catching targets from tight ends, from the tight end position that run down the field.
Finished his career as the number 3 tight end in receiving yards.
All
For
time.
his era, that tells you a lot.
Yeah. And earned a nickname as well, as Steve Foley pointed out on Thursday.
Look, I was hoping Justin Simmons would break it. And he's a guy as a person,
That's the wrong one.
That's the wrong clip.
I'll find the Riley Odoms clip. Let me pick that up. But let's play the Joe Collier clip. How about that? After my gaff.
Okay.
Here's Foley on Joe Collier. You want to talk about respect and adoration? How many times did he mention Joe's name? Quite a few. And here's one of the clips that he said about Joe Collier.
I just wish I could give Joe Collier a call. I called him before this last Super Bowl, and I would call him often, and all the players that we played with, they loved Joe Collier, and he was an incredible coach and man, and got the most out of us. And he's just a special man. And I just wish that I could have, after the 9 o'clock call with Greg, gotten off the phone and said, Joe, another one of yours is in. And so I want to thank him and the rest of the coaches, but mainly Joe Collier for taking chances on a lot of guys and putting them at new positions.
New position from quarterback to cornerback.
Yeah. By the way, check your email. I'll tell you on it. Like, I have to say it on air. So
okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah,
I got it now. I'll have it very shortly.
It's a quick clip. Yeah, that's actually that is probably the saddest thing about this is Joe Collier, having died recently, isn't around to see Steve Foley go into the Ring of Fame.
Right.
This is now, if you look back at that 1977 defense, this is, let's see, you had Paul Smith, Steve Foley now, of course, Billy Thompson, Louis Wright, Tom Jackson, and Randy Gradishar, all in the Ring of Fame. And the thing is, like, you could make a good argument for guys like Barney Chavis and Reuben Carter as well. Reuben Carter, great nose tackle of those days. And Bob Swenson, also a Pro Bowl linebacker, I believe in 1979 or 1981, one of those 2 years. Bob Swenson and Steve Foley, in fact, still work together to this day in real estate.
There you go.
So,
and I did get the clip for the nickname for Riley Odoms.
Let's play that.
Let's hear this thing.
Riley, we called him the judge for a reason. He was judge and jury when he caught a pass. He would punish a defensive back. We gave him that nickname, and he was a vicious tight end as well as a great blocker and pass receiver. So I'm honored to go in with the judge.
vicious tight end.
I like it.
I mean, he probably scared more than a few defensive backs when he would come down the seam. And, again, number 5 overall pick was Riley Odoms back then, which, I mean, we could probably say, I'm sure if we talked about it today, we could talk about positional value. But that wasn't a thing in 1972 when you didn't have a salary cap and you weren't trying to juggle, juggle resources in order to build a roster. But think about this. I mean, this was back in the day when passing numbers were down. In fact, led to a lot of the rules changes in 1978. But after his rookie season, 21 catches, 320 yards, and a touchdown, he had north of 600 yards back-to-back years, 73 and 74. Pro Bowl in both years, first team All-Pro then, first team All-Pro in 75, 544 yards, second team All-Pro 1977, 4-time Pro Bowler. And even though he didn't last Super Bowl 21, he was on that 1983 team, that first team of John Elway. Riley Odoms actually ended his career with a playoff Bronco team there in 1983 that was in the wild card round and did play in that game. His final. So for us, both Steve Foley and Riley Odoms, their final games were postseason games.
Mm-hmm.
So they bridged some eras, but man, I mean, someone like Riley Odoms just coming down the field, he listed at 230, played it a bit bigger than that, and had a long stride when he got going and a nose for the end zone. He should have been in a while ago too. Usually 2 first-team All-Pros has been an automatic ticket to the Ring of Fame, assuming you get the minimum of 4 seasons as a Bronco. So he got lost in the shuffle a little bit over the years, and I always thought that was unfair.
Yeah. Well, now they're making it right. And the great thing is we'll wrap up today's show about this, Mace, is, and if I get the quote wrong, please correct me, but like we all stand on the shoulders of those who came before us.
Yes.
Usually we talk generational, family-wise, but football is family. And with the Broncos family, you have this greatness of Riley Odoms, the greatness of Steve Foley. You don't get a Justin Simmons or name any of the Broncos safeties that are all fantastic. Yeah. How much adoration does Steve has for Steve Atwater? Right?
Exactly, yeah.
You don't get that without the standing on the shoulders of the Orange Crush.
You don't get that, but it's reciprocated because when Steve Foley says something like, I wanted Justin Simmons to break my interception record. Mm-hmm. There's a pride in him. It's funny to think, like, as Steve was up there yesterday and he was talking about wanting Simmons to break his record, the thought occurred to me that, obviously, Justin Simmons is still with us, but there was probably a little bit of sadness for Steve Foley that he went out there, watched practice, and he didn't see a guy who was very much one of the worthy heirs to the legacy that Foley had as a Bronco. And then, of course, Riley Odoms, just look at the jersey number 88. We're probably talking at this time next year about Demaryius Thomas being a Ring of Famer, also number 88. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. 2 players who, at their positions, because Demaryius Thomas was a big wide receiver, 2 players who, when they got the ball in space, they created some fear in opposing defenders. So it's interesting to think about how Foley and Odoms, where they fit in Broncos history, but how also in recent years we've seen very worthy heirs to their legacies.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. Good to make it right. We will have a future Ring of Fame video coming out for you over the weekend.
They got some work to do.
They've got some work to do. And they're one player.
Yeah.
I'm going to lead with one player. I'm not going to spoil it in this show, but there's one player I'm standing on the table for, like next year.
Yeah. In my opinion, they're not done catching up. I think as far as players go, they're done catching up with the 1970s. As far as players go, that's going to lead to a discussion in that when we get to the Ring of Fame over the weekend. But, when it comes to eras, even though it lacks the Super Bowl punch, there's an era of the Broncos that needs to be better recognized. We're going to talk about that over the weekend.
All right. That's coming up. Of course, as always, how do you help us out on YouTube, Mace?
Like,
comment,
share,
subscribe,
hit that notification bell
so that you
never miss a vid.
That's right. He's Andrew Mason. Follow him on all the socials at Mace Denver. I'm at Cecil Lammey saying OBT's BFD. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. And would you please stay frosty?